wherever you want, sir. Okay, we've lost your partner. I want to welcome you all to the Kennedy School. My name is Dick Cavanaugh. I'm the executive dean here. And let me describe what our program is tonight. We have the great and good fortune of having both of the standard bearers of the Democratic Party who are running for governor and lieutenant governor tonight, in case some of you with the buttons didn't know. And the program is that Bob Massey, who is the candidate for lieutenant governor, has a short statement. After that, Mark Roosevelt, who is the candidate for governor, has a longer statement. And then we will go to Q's and A's, where hopefully you will have shorter statements and they will have longer statements. So let me begin by first of all saying that this forum is the product of a number of groups, not only the Kennedy School of Government and the Institute of Politics, but also the Harvard Young Democrats and the Massachusetts Democrats. I am compelled to say that we have also invited the Republican candidates who may or may not be here, although I do not think they will be here tonight. Let me then first introduce Bob Massey. Bob Massey has the best of all worlds. He is a graduate of Princeton, Yale, and Harvard, which means that no matter how U.S. News ranks people, he's number one. He has a bachelor's degree from Princeton. He went to the Yale Divinity School and then the Harvard Business School, where he received a doctorate. Although he is new to statewide electoral politics, he has had a life of public service. He currently has been at Harvard at the Divinity School as a lecturer in ethics and as a director of an important research project there. He's been an Episcopal priest both in Somerville and in New York City, and he's worked for people that have ranged from Ralph Nader to Scoop Jackson. He will deliver a few remarks. Bob.
Thank you. You know, as someone who spent 5 years teaching at Harvard, I'm still learning to adjust to the 80-20 rule that we have arranged for our speaking engagements. So I'm about at 40-60, and in a few more weeks, Mark, I'll be down to 20 so that you can have the 80. But I did have a couple of things I wanted to say today. Being back at Harvard is a great pleasure for me. I'm on leave from the Divinity School. I hope I don't come back to the Divinity School too soon, except as a visitor. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about why I decided to run for lieutenant governor. I did so because after years of serving as an urban pastor in Somerville and teaching at the Divinity School, I came back from a 6-month period in South Africa to find that Massachusetts had sunk into such a frustrated and angry state. So many voters were turning away from the electoral process, and I was profoundly disturbed by the corrosive cynicism that seemed to threaten to overtake our government and our people. Such cynicism tells us that our principles and our actions do not matter, and suggests that we cannot reach agreement on common goals or values because human beings are motivated solely by selfishness. While democracy is sweeping the globe, it is stagnating here in its birthplace. And while the peoples of South Africa and Eastern Europe energetically debate how to build new nations, we in Massachusetts are losing the belief that we can act together to solve our problems. And for this decline, I believe that Bill Weld and Paul Cellucci must accept some responsibility. As Václav Havel said, politicians are a mirror of their society and a kind of embodiment of its potential. At the same time, paradoxically, society is a mirror of its politicians. It is largely up to politicians which social forces they choose to liberate and which they choose to suppress, whether they rely on the good in each citizen or on the bad," unquote. That's really the challenge that Mark and I face in this campaign. During our primary campaigns, we had the great privilege of traveling all across the state, talking and listening to people from all walks of life. And we've seen many, many things that have bothered us, from burned out businesses in Holyoke to children who did not have decent schools or enough to eat in other parts of the state. But nothing disturbed us more than what we saw several weeks ago in Dorchester. On the night before the primary, the governor of Massachusetts appeared at a rally in Adams Corner, and we listened to him carefully to see if he would articulate a single principle or give a single positive reason for his candidacy. He did not. Instead, he offered a few lame jokes and he ambled off into the night. At first, I was surprised, and then I became angry, because it is not funny that there are hundreds of thousands of people without health insurance in Massachusetts, and in 4 years, Weld and Cellucci did nothing to help them. It is not funny that 54,000 manufacturing jobs have disappeared, and instead of supporting small businesses that create 95% of all new jobs, Weld and Cellucci chose to hand out government favors to their boardroom buddies. And it's not funny that Weld has undermined public education, raising tuition, cutting scholarships, making it harder for young people to pass through the door of learning to a better life. And it is not funny that Weld betrayed the public trust by taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in unethical campaign contributions, that he uses a corporate lobbyist to solicit money from businesses with state contracts, and that he has sent a clear message that the government of Massachusetts is now for sale. As Governor, Bill Weld could have used this election to elevate the public discussion, and instead, he has debased it. By spending millions of dollars on negative advertising, Bill Weld has shown that he has no goal other than to win, no strategy other than to exploit our anger and our fear. By hiding behind bumper sticker slogans, Weld has shown he does not want to talk about real problems that affect real working families: the lack of jobs, the lack of education and health care, and the failure, our failure, to do anything serious about crime. His deeds and his failed performance in the debate last night reveal that beneath his affable exterior is a hollow core. Bill Weld has no underlying convictions, and he swings like a weather vane in whatever direction his polls and his ambition dictate. In the weeks ahead, the voters should ask of every candidate for every statewide office, what do you believe in? What values do you cherish? What future are you trying to create? Is there anything that moves you, anything that gives you passion, any positive reason why you deserve to be elected to office? I do not believe Bill Weld and Paul Cellucci can answer those questions. Mark and I challenge them to try. Mark Roosevelt and I have profoundly different understandings. Mark and I believe that the resources of the state lie in each other, in the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth is formed by people with different skills and backgrounds and needs working together to make something that none of us could make on our own. A Commonwealth is a community guided by the underlying principles of mutual commitment and common sense, of public and private responsibility, of inclusiveness, equality, opportunity, and above all, justice. That is the understanding Mark and I share of what Massachusetts was meant to be. These are the convictions that will guide us in office. These are the beliefs shared by millions of citizens that will, I believe, reverse the spread of cynicism, restore our faith in democracy, and help us to build the Commonwealth we desire and we deserve. Thank you.
I think they like you. Mark Roosevelt is a distinguished member of the Great and General Court, which people from New Jersey, such as me, refer to as the House of Representatives. He has been the chairman of the Education Committee, or actually the Committee on Education, Arts, and Humanities. He was a father of the Education Reform Act of 1993, which is a extraordinary pace-setting piece of legislation. Also the author of the Massachusetts Hunger Relief Act, the College Opportunity Loan Fund, which is very important to those of us who are concerned that people pay their tuition. And prior to that had been extremely active in the House. He lives on Beacon Hill, and despite all of these successes, received his bachelor's degree from Harvard College in 1978 and his JD from the Harvard Law School in 1983. Would you welcome Mark Roosevelt?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a nice, calm, relaxing pleasure to be here. Let me first ask a couple of questions of you all. First of all, how many of you are Massachusetts residents and voters? Great, that's good. The rest of you can leave. How many of you are Democrats? Okay, I don't know what to do about the rest of you. What I would like to do tonight is not to give you my traditional stump speech for various reasons. One, it might bore you. And two, it might bore me. And three, I want to really think reflectively with you about what it means to be a Democrat in a couple of different senses. This is obviously a campaign in Massachusetts about this state's future. We have not only the governor's race and the race for lieutenant governor that Bob and I are waging, but we have a race for the U.S. Senate of obvious national importance. When I speak, especially to college audiences, I find that party affiliation has grown less meaningful to people. When I gave, oh, by the way, how many of you watched the debate last night? And what were the rest of you doing that was so important? In my conclusion in the debate last night, when you get these moments, and I'm 38 years old, I've never run for statewide office before, in my case, you actually really think about what you want to say. In the governor's case, I guess you don't. I wanted to explain to people why I got into this business. And as I thought through with myself why I got into this business, I realized how much in my life being a Democrat does mean to me. And again, as I've talked to many audiences across the state, especially among younger people, I've realized that that is not a completely shared identity anymore, that party has become less meaningful. So what I would like to try to do, and I will try to keep it relatively brief, I'll maybe speak for an hour and a half or 2 hours, is to explain in some particular and also philosophical senses why it is so important to me and why I think it should be important to you as well. I think one of the reasons why it's become less meaningful is that our problems have become so much more complex. And as we grope clumsily towards some solutions to these complex problems, it doesn't seem like there are any easy answers anymore, because there aren't any easy answers anymore. And it doesn't seem like the old ways are necessarily working, and that's true. But I think behind the individual issues, behind whether we're talking about health care or education, whether we're talking about crime or jobs, there's a philosophical point of view. There's a background of basic beliefs and presumptions from which we operate that clearly separate Republicans and Democrats. When I think to myself and ask myself why it is so important to me that I'm a Democrat, and without exaggeration, other than my family, other than my friends, being a Democrat probably is the most important thing to me in my life. It helps give me definition. It helps make me understand who I am and why I do what I do. And in explaining that, I think I need to think about what the philosophical backgrounds of that are. And I like to think about it also in some sense of historical context. The one thing I basically understand about the difference at its heart is that we accept as Democrats the responsibility to try to change the world. The Republican philosophy is, in a sense, and don't laugh, almost like a medieval theology. They accept the basic premise that the world is as it is. And they develop an ideology, almost a theology, around explaining why we shouldn't meddle with it. In the old days, in the medieval days, that theology was that God created the world as it was, which was feudal, in which some people worked essentially in slavery for others, and that challenging it was wrong because the world was created in that light, and that it is how it was meant to be. Now, you might think it an exaggeration to equate Republican politics in 20th century America with medieval theology. I actually don't think it is. The Republican ideology, which changes and adapts over time, has been throughout the 20th century how to say no to virtually every attempt on our part to change the world in a fairer direction, to try to think that we as human beings have not only the right but perhaps the obligation to adjust what we see as basic root gut unfairnesses. Now, the ideology or the theology behind it changes. At times, it was Adam Smith's invisible hand, the market, in a sense, replacing the theology, that you cannot mess with the forces of the market because the market is inherently perfect, and the people that fall by the wayside have done so for reasons. And I think that, again, is the basic premise, that people who are rich and have assets and are in positions of power are so because of some fundamental betterness on their part. And that people who have less, in fact, who have little, or in fact often have nothing, are that way for the same reason, because there is something inherently wrong with them, that they are not worthy of what the people who have do not have. This is also social Darwinism, the concept that that is the best way for society to operate. Now, I don't know how many of you have been following the recent books that have come out, led once again by Mr. Murray. And there is a new strain of thought in exactly the same vein. And it's not any longer that the market is perfect. It's not any longer that social Darwinism, even though it is a social Darwinist offshoot, it is IQ as destiny. The Charles Murray thought now is that nothing that you can do in the way of social programs, nothing the way that you can do in terms of trying to shape our world can interfere with the destiny that is inherent in your IQ. It is inherent and it is unchangeable, whether it is hereditary or whether it is environmental. And anything that we seek to do to adjust the social stratums based on our desire to create more fairness will do exactly the opposite. That's what his first book said, and that's what this book says. But once again, it's a continuum. It is a continuum of different ideological perspectives developed to rebut the presumption that we have an obligation to create a more just society. Now, if you look at whatever we have done in the 20th century to make a more just world, these various arguments have been used against them every single time. Whether it was the child labor laws, whether it was minimum wage, whether it was Social Security, whether it was Medicaid, or whether it was Medicare, you can just replace the arguments against one with the arguments against the other. And it's the same today. Whether it's family leave or medical leave or health care reform, the arguments are exactly the same. And that is why I think no matter how different it looks, and that the problems that Clinton faces look more immense than they have been in the past, they are probably more similar than we think. Because the battles may be on different issues, and the spokespeople may be different, but the issues fundamentally underlying it are the same. If you think about what John Kennedy said, one man can make a difference and every man should try. That is fundamentally not an ideological statement, but it couldn't be uttered by a Republican. The reason being that they do not accept the presumption that we can change our world in that way, and therefore we have an obligation to do it. I think back, actually, there's been a lot of confusion in this campaign over who I'm related to and who I'm not, and just so you all understand, I'm related to every single United States president, one way or the other. So I can quote them all as close relatives. Actually, my friend Peter Howe from the Globe is here, whose partner Frank Phillips considers himself a minor genealogist. But I look back on Theodore Roosevelt, who was a Republican, in a days when it meant something very different. And under him, we created the national park system. Think about it with me for just 1 second. The national park system. We couldn't do that now. We would be obstructed from doing that now. And no Republican could possibly even talk about creating the national park system. If we're doing it today, they would be talking about privatizing the Grand Canyon. No, I'm serious. It sounds amusing, but I'm serious. And selling access to it in a market-oriented way so that those who desired it sufficiently and were willing to pay for it enough would have access to it. We wouldn't go the route that we went in the past. We wouldn't be willing to take Yellowstone and Yosemite and the Grand Canyon and so many other places and give them to the public for the public use. Now that is something that is quite astounding if you think about it. The issues that we face today, because I'm trying to think about how our race with Bill Weld and how Ted Kennedy's race with Mitt Romney figure into this, are amazingly similar. Let's step back and think about what's happening to this country and to Massachusetts today. Unfortunately, Massachusetts is accelerating various national trends that, to my mind, are extremely disappointing. And those trends are that we're becoming increasingly three very separate societies. This has happened before in America, but it is happening more so now than ever. An upper class, an upper echelon of about the top 10% of the population that is doing extraordinarily well. Unbelievably well in Massachusetts. I'll give you a figure that is so astounding that I've checked it 10 or 15 times and I hardly still believe it. Do you know what the top 1% of Massachusetts IRS families report in an average income? The average total income of the top 1% of Massachusetts citizens is $911,000 a year. 1% of Massachusetts folks make an average income of $911,000 a year. Meanwhile, the middle income in our state, like across America, is getting squeezed. Squeezed to the point where, for them, their real standard of living has been declining quite steadily for about 20 years. If you're a Massachusetts resident and you're a high school graduate but not a college graduate, your real wages have declined 28% since 1970. If you are a high school dropout, your real wages have declined an incredible 42% since 1970. Now in Massachusetts, just to shift to one specific issue, we are having a fight about a graduated income tax. Now again, one of my relatives who was president, in fact the same one, proposed a graduated income tax in 1912. And in Massachusetts, we're still fighting about the fact that the people who make $911,000 a year should pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes than the people who make $30,000 a year? It's incredible. And it is incredible to me how this issue has become focused. But we should not kid ourselves about what it means. Mitt Romney and Bill Weld's entire vision of the world is in fact predicated on comforting the comfortable. And again, to go back to the philosophical origins of such, it is predicated on the fact that if we do anything that is fair and just for people, if we sympathize with those folks that are struggling to put a mortgage payment in the mail, pay their car bills, and dream of sending their kids to college, if we sympathize with them, and have less sympathy for the folks that are doing so well they don't know how to spend their money. We will somehow disrupt the economic system in such a way that everybody will suffer, which is nonsensical. It is nonsensical, but is the age-old reply to any request to do something that is fundamentally fair and fundamentally just. Now, as I thought through for myself again, trying to explain to myself what it means to be a Democrat and why I'm a Democrat and why I care so much about this and why, not to be too emotional, but to be very honest with you, I don't want my son, I have a 9-year-old son, Matthew, I don't want my son growing up in Bill Weld and Mitt Romney's Massachusetts. And I don't want my son growing up in that Massachusetts for a reason, because I don't want the values that they embrace and the values that they reject to be the values that my son grows up in. I thought to myself about what is happening to us here. Now, again, I will tell you, in thinking about what it means to be a Democrat, that we too need to change, not because our basic underlying philosophy has changed. It haven't. We are the party that is charged with and has accepted the responsibility for trying to change things, for not accepting the status quo, for not saying that things are built from on high, whether it's God or whether it's the market or whether it's social Darwinism or whether it's IQ is heredity. We are the ones burdened with trying to make equality of opportunity less of a joke and more of a reality. Now, in my mind, we need to step a long way back and look at what we've done that's worked and what we've done that hasn't worked. Not because, like them, we want to use the fact that we occasionally stumble as an excuse for doing nothing, because it's our obligation to try to do better. And let's face it, not everything that we have tried has worked. So as I thought through again what I wanted to say in this precious minute and 30 seconds that we're given to conclude this kind of debates, I thought about Massachusetts, and I thought about what we could actually do collectively to make a difference in people's lives. And it's how I believe very strongly we must re-energize this party and retake a sense of building hope and opportunity to our people. We need to look very differently, I think, at the way government spends its money. I actually came to this institution and heard Bill Clinton give a speech on this 3 years ago, 4 years ago maybe, before he was running for president, that was absolutely stunning. He had a different way of looking at government spending, a different prism through which to analyze it. To analyze how we spend money, looking at it, how much we spend on the past, the present, and the future. And if you look at how America and Massachusetts spend money, we spend more on the past than any other nation in the world. What is the past? It is paying for something now that we incurred the benefit of before, the national debt, pensions, obligations. We spend less, but not demonstrably less, on the present than other folks do. We're proud to have the most expensive healthcare system ever developed by man, but we spend less on social welfare payments. But where we are systematically outspent is where we need to put our attention, and that is in the future account. Education, environmental protection, transportation, spending $1 today to get the benefit of down the road. Now, if you look at what's happened to our economy, which has been, as a nation compared to others, in steady decline for a considerable period of time, I think this helps explain it. If you're unwilling to invest in the future, and this has been true for 20 or 30 years in this country relative to other nations, it is no wonder that over time you pay a price for it. When I stepped back and looked at my state, Massachusetts, exactly the same thing was happening to us. There's a professor here named Dutch Leonard that did a study on how Massachusetts spent its money. And we spent 30% more on human services and 30 to 50% less on education than other states did. And if you ask me what your struggle and my struggle are as Democrats to do in our generation what previous Democrats have done, which is to make life fairer, an earlier generation fundamentally took the elderly out of poverty through Social Security and Medicare. Our obligation, your obligation, my obligation is to deal with the issue of children. Because what we have done in our society is put children last at every single point. whether it's divorce laws that are put in place to help adults lead more free and easy lives, but leave children stranded emotionally, psychologically, and often financially, or it's schools that are strapped. I spent 3 years of my life on an education reform bill for Massachusetts. I learned the hard way what we are doing to kids. This is the 4th richest state in America. We have problems, but we are lucky and we have huge assets. And I visited schools that looked like they were in third world countries. I visited Holyoke, Massachusetts, where they had an average of 60 kids in a class. They had glass all over the place because they had laid off their custodians. 30% of Massachusetts schools charge kids for participating in after-school sports. That's a disgrace. To charge a kid in a poor community like Brockton $150 for playing varsity football or varsity basketball, there is no excuse for doing that. 30% of our schools approximately had dropped music and art from their curriculum, something we took for granted when we were growing up, but we're now denying kids. And when I look at what we have done as Democrats, what we believe in equality of opportunity. And let me tell you something, equality of opportunity is a joke. And it's a joke because of what we have done to schools. It is so dependent on the education you get where you were born that we shouldn't even try to defend it. Now, we took great steps in our education reform bill to try to remedy that, but there's a whole host of ways that we must rededicate ourselves to kids and to schools and to opportunity. But we also must ask ourselves as Democrats, what other social program other than schools has ever really proven to make a difference in making equality of opportunity less of a myth? What social program has ever really proven, other than schools, that you could take people who were born with less, with more challenges, and actually give them the chance to make the most of their lives? We have gotten very far away from that. We have gotten to the point where we tried to place Band-Aids over huge social programs, many of which, if not most of which, were created by our absence of attention to schools. So it seems to me, in redefining and reformulating and giving our generation a challenge as to what the Democratic Party must do now, it must be in the area of education and it must be in the area of children. Now, let me mention 2 other things in this, and then I will stop. There are things that we as Democrats have not really been permitted to talk about. And let me just address them in a pretty oblique way. When I go to an honors ceremony in the city of Boston to honor the kids who are doing well and making the honor roll, it's an incredible experience. It's also an experience that should teach us a lot. A great many of the kids being honored are recent immigrants. Many, if not most of them, Asian. At these ceremonies, their parents are there and their grandparents are there, most of whom do not speak English. They're dressed in suits. They're cheap suits, but they're suits. And they're telling us something. These families still know what the American dream is all about. These families still know that, rightly done, this still is the land of opportunity. These families still understand what the generational compact used to mean to all of us. We sacrificed for kids. We invested in their education. We knew that they were our future. We have a lot to learn from the immigrant groups that are revitalizing many of the cities in this state and are showing in our school systems what can happen if you're willing to make the effort. Now, conversely, I also recently just was lucky enough to go to Everett. Everett is a working-class community in Massachusetts whose schools were decimated financially over the last 10 years. I got to see a school that wouldn't have been there without our education reform bill, giving these children, and early 3- and 4-year-old kids, an early childhood education opportunity. You look in those kids' eyes, you talk to their teachers, and you remember why we're Democrats. You remember why we thought public service was a calling worth having. Because these kids, through what we did, will have a better opportunity to make the most of their lives than their older brothers and sisters did. And talking to the teachers about it, you understand again why we can't give up on trying. That is our obligation to do. That's why I will never back away from Bill Clinton, no matter what the poll numbers show, because I'm proud once again that we in America are trying once again to deal with our national problems. Now, one of the nicest things for me today, and what I have to tell you was a great day after this debate, was that a woman came into our headquarters. I wasn't there, but she gave a check to the campaign and a check from her son. And she said one very simple thing to the person who took the check. She said, I better check it, make sure I'm right. She said, my son and I are both Democrats. And after watching the debate last night, we remember why. Now, I hope what I've done tonight, and probably not done as well as I would like, is explain to you why that is a very emotional thing to me. Why that is something that, again, restores my reason for being in this business, no matter how tough it is. We must always remember why we're in politics, why public service is a calling worthy of our attention. The only point is we can make life better for people, but we only can if we try. And the challenge to you, the challenge to me, the challenge to Bob Massey in our generation is to put children back on the front burner, to restore a sense of hope and opportunity to people who've lost it, to remind them, as we remind ourselves, we're Democrats. We're Democrats because we care, because we try, and we know that life isn't worth it if you don't. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We now come to the part which is your part of the program, which is your opportunity to ask questions. There are two microphones, one on either side here, and what we're going to do is alternate with the microphones. A ground rule. This is about questions. What is a question? A question takes no more than 1 minute. A question has no more than 3 sentences. One of the questions must end with a question mark. Okay? And so that is going to be our process of doing questions. And again, we have microphones on either side. These two candidates have decided that they will jointly and severally answer these questions, which means that you can direct the question generally, or you can state which person you wish to answer it. Gentlemen, would you come here? And I suggest you start at my left and your right.
Is there a reason for that?
It's Kennedy School.
Mr. Roosevelt, how do you feel about question 9?
I'm against it.
You're no on 9.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Was you no on 9 too?
When
He's no on 9 too.
great. When you are in office, when you take office, what will you do if, by any chance, the vote is yes? What will you do to help the thousands of people who will be homeless?
Well, there are lots of programs. I mean, we don't have a housing program any longer in Massachusetts, unfortunately, under Bill Weld. The major part of my program would be transitional rental assistance, in a sense a voucher program. The people who are under rent control now, who are impoverished, would be eligible to receive a transitional rental assistance voucher.
And the others,
Well, the others aren't eligible for programs because they don't meet the financial requirement for same. And that would mean that they're in the situation that everybody else is in.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
As a Republican, and I don't want to bend the rules of questioning too much, but I want to first off correct one of the mischaracterizations of our party. We were founded in Ripon, Wisconsin as the most progressive and just party in the country. And
What happened?
you can witness you can witness the justice.
That's okay, this is fun.
No, you can witness the justice in the fact that William Garrison cast his first vote as a Republican. That Walt Whitman.
Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. You need to say no more than that.
You eulogized our first president, and probably the most poetic words ever written from American literature. But my question is, do you not think that in Bill Weld's outspoken advocacy of gay rights, and I would wonder if you could name a governor that has been more out in front on this issue, do you not think that he is carrying on the commitment of Republicans to justice for all Americans, and do you not think that that continues in his outspoken advocacy for immigration rights in a more and more anti-immigration climate that's prevailing in our country?
I admire Bill Weld's persistent support for gays and lesbians as governor. I really do. If I could make one point on that, and I really don't want to detract from that because I think it is one of the things that he has done that I admire most. I was the chief sponsor of the Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights Bill in 1986. I took over that bill when it had failed by 28 votes previously. Times were very hard then to be out front in support of gay men and lesbians. Patrick, you will remember what it was like. It was a ugly and a brutal battle. The characterizations of myself, even as a supporter, were vicious, but far less vicious than the characterizations of people who were out front about being gays and lesbians. Bill Weld opposed the bill. He opposed it aggressively. He debated against it. He said that this was an unworthy minority who didn't deserve any particular support for their rights. Now, he changed his mind, and I am proud and glad of that. But at the times when things were really hard and the fight was really tough, he was on the other side. Yes, ma'am.
I guess it's going to be just a short statement and then the question.
All right,
to
Dick,
the
get ready.
No, to the future governor and lieutenant governor. Okay. It's an established fact that in the political game, once the politicians get in and with their promises and speeches of milk and honey, they are all forgotten, and the Democrats are the same as the Republicans. The middle class is being eliminated, and we are now a nation of the very poor and the very rich. Governor Weld is eliminating the poor, no health care, no jobs, and they're accusing of being lazy, and they're being eliminated also. And the result is Governor Weld's philosophies, Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest, and that is the rich. Again, my question to you is,
Very much in
to
line with
both
my
of
speech.
you, how will you both be committed to your political promises?
Why don't you do that?
I get the easy ones.
You do.
I am challenging you.
No, I appreciate the challenge. I think, in part, this comes down to a question of character.
Right.
And I
Morality.
think that since we're talking about medieval theology and we can talk about Aristotelian philosophy, you've got to look back and see what we've done, what kind of lives we've lived, what kind of commitments we've had, what kind of things we've fought for. And you take those little data points and you draw a line through them and you project out and see whether you think we're
I
likely
was
to
a
do that.
history major, I know.
Okay. So my,
Harvard, 1981.
all right. Would you like to help us out on our campaign?
Well, be glad to.
I think really we can say whatever we like. You're absolutely right. But in the end, what voters have to do is make a judgment of what kind of people they're electing. And I think that policies can change, conditions can change, and what you want to know is what kind of people are you putting in positions of authority, what kind of life they've lived up to that point, and whether you can trust them to make judgments in the best interest of all people.
My question to you is, how strong will you be to
Well,
do those things?
we-
Say very.
No? I mean, you'll
Mark
have an
says
awful
very.
lot of, obstacles, an awful lot, pardon me?
Very.
But Bob's right. You're making, when you vote for people, you're
Right.
making very personal judgments.
Definitely.
You have to just look at us and decide whether we mean what we say and say what we mean. And, you know, obviously we're going to tell you we do. And obviously that is your choice to make. Let me just say one thing about politics in my view.
Right.
If you're not in it because you want to get something done and because something moves you, get out. Because it's not worth the trouble. And I'm in this, believe me, this is not always fun. I've taken $1 million in negative ads from this current governor. And, you know, I don't enjoy that. It doesn't, you know, make me get up in the morning like real peachy keen happy all the time. So if I didn't hang on to what I really believed and why I'm in this business, I wouldn't be in it. Sir, I know you're safe because you already got a sticker on.
Well, I'm enough of a Democrat to have voted with some enthusiasm for John Silber against Bill Weld the first time around. And I've
You're a
been
yellow
very
dog
happy.
Democrat.
I've been very happy to see that Mr. Silber has strongly endorsed Senator Kennedy in a column in the Globe. Have you asked, or will you ask, Mr. Silber to do something similar for you?
He has been supportive of me actually for quite a long period of time.
Glad to hear it. More important, how do you propose to counter Governor Weld's assertion, which he made at least twice last night, that he's actually closer to the majority of the people in that he puts such emphasis on keeping taxes down?
Well, if you watch the whole debate, you know that Bill Weld has this sort of box set up for himself. He talks about taxes, crime, and welfare. And in fact, his box is actually a triangle because it doesn't have a fourth side. So I guess I misspoke. But that is his mantra. Now, he gets that from a very simple source. It's called polls. And he can see that that's what the polls say people are worried about. If this is to be a campaign of checklists, checking off who's with who and, you know, where the majority are, Bill Weld's going to win. Because in point of fact, as we found out last night when he was asked, if there was any single issue where he disagreed with the public and he'd be willing to stand up and hold firm on it, he could not name one. So if the issue is, are you on the side of the polls all the time, I surrender. I can't do that. It's not me. But I don't think it is. And I think that the lady's question, which was beautifully asked before, is more to the point, which is in the end, people aren't just going to go down the line and check where you are on every issue. They're going to make a judgment about you as a person. That's what we have to hope for, anyway. Yes?
Hi, my name's Lindsay Thomas, and I'm a junior at the college. And I have a question as someone who's always wanted to lead a life of public service ever since I was young. I've been slightly deterred.
You're not young anymore.
Well, I
now
mean,
are you? How's the
little.
Social Security coming in?
A toddler. I've been slightly deterred by watching the negative campaigning that you have had to incur. What would you say to young people who are kind of rethinking their choice?
Don't run against a rich Republican with $8 million in the bank. It's just a bad idea. Don't do it. Now, I would, look, Bob wants to answer. All right, I'll go first. If we let what's happening continue to happen, I mean, I've been in the legislature 8 years. I've watched the quality and energy level of the people seeking office go way down during that time. It's partly because of the salary, but it's more because of the public abuse. I really do believe that journalism is in journalism. Journalists. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That a lot of what's happened in the media has been very difficult for people in public service. I mean, I am so sick and tired of people beating up on public servants all the time. Not just elected officials, but people that work for the state or for the city. Daycare workers, child care workers, mental health workers. I'm sick of it. Now, these people are mostly paid very little money, and most of them want to do a good job and believe in what they're doing, Why the hell we need to kick the hell out of them every week, I don't know. I don't want to be part of it. But I'd make the same point that I made earlier, which is if there's something that moves you in your heart and your gut and makes you want to get into the business, you can't let the rest of the nonsense keep you out of it, or they'll win all the time instead of most of the time.
Thanks.
Bob wants to say something. Stay right there.
When I was in college myself, I had thought for some time that I might go into politics, but I arrived at college in the period of the Vietnam War and of Watergate, and I decided that it was too contaminated an area, and I then looked around to see what other ways I could serve in, and that's one of the things that led me to the ministry. But I came to the realization after I'd spent some time working with people in the inner city and working on problems of economic injustice and so forth, that in the end, if you care about making a difference, you have to edge back towards the public arena. And so I edged back towards it by teaching about it and exhorting my students that if they really cared about what was happening in the world, they should step forward and do things and take a position. And lo and behold, eventually I decided I had to practice at least a little of what I'd been preaching. So in the end, I agree absolutely with Mark. You know, you can stay on the sidelines and maintain a certain purity, maintain a certain distance and disengagement, and be relatively safe. But then you cede the public sphere to those who are in it for a wide variety of reasons, and many of which are not great. And you help feed the cynicism that people feel. So my decision, and I think all of our choices, are basically how do we take the unique qualities, the strengths and weaknesses that we have, and find ways in which to give to others. At least that's my perspective on life. We don't have all that much time, here, so we might as well figure out the best way we can contribute. And so for some people, I very much hope that that will be in public service, as Mark has chosen and as I have chosen, as I'm looking forward over the next 4 years to fulfilling.
Thank you.
I thought you did an excellent job of articulating the importance of the basic idea of equal opportunity, and it deeply resonated with me, but it doesn't seem to resonate across the country. And I'm wondering why you think that is. It seems like in theory, if a few percent of the population owns all the wealth, it would be in everyone's interest, or 90% of the population, to sort of be following the ideology you're putting forth. Do you think it's more because Democrats have failed to articulate this message, or because Republicans have just been attacking everything?
I think it's a series of complex things. I would say, if you ask me what the biggest problem in this country is today, and the biggest problem in Massachusetts, it's cynicism. I think cynicism is the #1 enemy we face. And that cynicism in the public arena reaches to the point where many people are just damn skeptical that we can do anything about our problems. And if they think we can, they're very reluctant to believe that it's government that can be an instrument of that solution. And the problem with that is there's some legitimacy to that, which we can't negate. Government is not always the best tool to solve a problem. We as Democrats, I think, for a period of time did pretend or intend or did believe that there was a government answer to every problem. There aren't. We ought to get out of the way where we don't have any business being in. One of the things I've learned to say, and some people find it harsh, I don't mean it to be, is you cannot help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves. And you cannot shield people from the consequences of their own conduct. We did try to do that. That's a large part of the whole welfare reform debate. Can we shield people from the consequences of their conduct? We can't. So I believe that it is a reformulation of what our real objectives are, and that's why I talk as much as I try to do about schools and jobs, and about being there for the people who want to make the most of their lives, want to play it straight, but need help to do so. But even at that point, there's just a deep cynicism, even on public schools, that we have the ability to structure and to run them in such a way that even with more money and better resources and better teachers and higher standards, the kids will get a better education. And so I think that cynicism is a large part of the issue. And you notice in any society that is perhaps on the way down, cynicism dominates. Cynicism dominates, and issues like gambling casinos start percolating. And that is unfortunately what we're facing right now. And the question is, can we beat it back?
Representative Roosevelt, healthcare reform failed in Washington this year, and the way the national elections are looking, probably has no real chance of going anywhere in the next Congress. Can you explain how you would work towards universal health care in Massachusetts absent any action in Washington?
I hope your pessimism is not justified, but it does seem to have a lot of basis to it. I firmly believe that Washington is the right place to do health care reform because I do believe in an employer mandate, and I believe that it is far better done at the national level so that states don't get into competition with each other for businesses and use health care as a bartering tool. I find this whole debate to be very symptomatic of what I tried to address in my comments. I mean, I look at Pizza Hut. Now, Pizza Hut's a corporation that is worldwide. They're in, I don't know how many countries, but many. There's only one country where Pizza Hut operates that they don't insure their employees for health, the United States of America. If you work for them in Belgium or in France or Japan or in Russia, you get health insurance. But only in the United States of America do you not. Now, what I would do at a state level with our limited resources and with my basic philosophy is ensure that every child under 19 is insured. And I would do that by asking of people who have over 400% of the poverty line that they insure their own children, or we would not any longer give them the tax deduction that they get for having a child. Because I believe if you make 50 grand a year, which would be that line, you have an obligation to insure your own child. Between 200 and 400%, I would use a sliding scale fee. Some money would come out of the uncompensated debt pool and the state's resources, some money from the families or the business. And under 200%, we would deal with it out of the uncompensated debt pool. It's not perfect, but children are the ones who most need preventative health care. They're the ones for whom, if we get the resources early, we will save ourselves the most money later. So that is the first step that I would take, and then hopefully be able to move further along, hopefully in conjunction with the federal government thereafter. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Representative Roosevelt, my name is David Hardy, and I'm a teacher here in Boston, not at a school, but at a prison. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your debate, on your performance last night. I turned the TV on not knowing who I would vote for, but when I turned it off, you had earned my vote.
Was it something in the water, or?
No. You earned my vote last night.
Thank you.
However, there is one thing I'd like you to clarify. In the debate, you criticized Governor Weld for not standing up for an unpopular issue, an issue that he knew was against the grain of the public, an issue that he knew was against public opinion. Certainly, the death penalty, it is not politically expedient to be against the death penalty, yet in this instance, you've changed your mind. Could you please explain why you changed your mind on the death penalty?
I will try. The death penalty is an unbelievably emotional and difficult issue for people. I had never had to vote on it as a legislator until this last year. I had been struggling with my position quietly. I do not broadcast, and I didn't last night, the death penalty is an answer to our crime problems. I don't even believe that the death penalty is much of a deterrent to crime. I do believe this. I believe that as we discuss the issues we're discussing tonight, a lot of it has to do with our trusting ourselves to be able to make judgments as a society collectively. I believe that there are some crimes that people can commit, and do commit, that are so beyond the pale of what's acceptable in human society that the person who has committed them has lost their right to live with the rest of us on this planet. I believe that in the overwhelming sense of chaos and lack of control that has begun to seep into our society, that the willingness and the ability to make that judgment is important. Most of the people who support me do not share that. My running mate doesn't share it. It's just something that I have come to believe on a personal level is important to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. I'd like to.
Now that did not get me applause. It's the first answer I've given tonight. I didn't get applause. Yes, sir.
My name is Andre Cherney. I'm an undergraduate, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the College Democrats.
Thank you very much. How many of your people will be holding signs and doing other work between now and election day? John Werner right there is in charge of all this. You can see him right
John and I are old friends, and we've been doing a lot, and we'll be doing even more after this speech tonight.
Good, thank you. Many of you were with Barrett in the primary. Can you explain that?
I was not one of them, and I guess it's temporary delusion for
That is. It's something that happens here. Thank you.
I'd just like to say...
That was a joke. Don't. That was just a joke.
I'd like to, first of all, say I was heartened and encouraged by your words about family and values and the importance of those two issues, and as well as the words about the limits of what government can do. During the campaign for the primary, and as well as now you're running as a new Democrat, as a different kind of Democrat. Can you say a bit philosophically about what that means, and especially talk about your feelings about the issue of welfare reform?
Well, again, I'll try not to be repetitive to what I said earlier. I'll apply it to welfare reform. When I look at welfare and I study the system, I think the incentives are all in the wrong place. In fact, I think they're kind of cracked. We say to people, the more you do to make a mess of your life, the more we're going to help you. The more you do to start getting your life together, the more we're going to take away from you. I think we ought to reverse those incentives and say to people, look, I call it a new social compact. You're coming to us seeking assistance. You're coming to us with a child, in fact, whom you cannot take care of financially. We're going to help you, but we also expect you to do certain things to help yourself. We lay out for you what we will do. Job training, educational opportunity, daycare, transportation, etc. But we also expect certain things of you in return. Fundamentally, by far the most important of which is not to have any additional children until you can take care of them. Now that is where a lot of the controversy lies. I think that's also where the gut of the matter lies. We face an epidemic in this country of kids having children and of births being born, kids being born illegitimately. Last year, 31% of all of American children were born to unmarried women. No, 31. You want to come up here and say that? I think it was 31. It was, in any case, I was born in the 1950s, and during that time it was 3% of American kids. So that's part of it. The other part of it is just the willingness to say, I mean, I said at the Democratic State Convention, which I was lucky enough to win, I said my 2 lines of there isn't a government answer to every problem, and you can't help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves. I was hissed by a certain percentage of the delegates, luckily not 50% of the delegates. That would have been a bad sign. But I believe those 2 statements are very important for us to make as Democrats. I also believe they're so self-evidently true that I don't understand there really being any particular debate about them. So that's, I guess, part of it, and hopefully I've explained part of it in other comments.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Mark Falzone. I'm the president of the College Democrats of Massachusetts. I was on my way
Wait a
here.
minute, what was he?
He's Harvard.
Oh, Harvard Democrats, okay.
And yes, I already know John, and that's all taken care of, so don't worry about it.
John, is he doing everything he can?
We want more. Okay. I was on my way here tonight, and just as I was leaving, a student from Salem State called me, and she said, I mentioned I was coming here tonight, and she said, oh, gee, that's great. We'd love to have Roosevelt out there, because there's a feeling, not just among Democrats at Salem State, but amongst the entire campus, that Governor Weld is tearing apart the public colleges in Massachusetts. My question is, what do you plan to do for the public colleges in Massachusetts?
The public colleges of Massachusetts are in a particular bind. We have escalated tuition and fees, which have doubled while Bill Well's been in office, to the point where our community colleges are so expensive that the folks who need access to public higher education, which is essentially at the community college level first, especially for poor women, are priced out of it. I would cap fees and tuition right now. We almost cannot call these institutions state institutions anymore. They are sort of slightly supported state institutions. But the other thing we need to do for some of the other colleges is we also need to ask things of them, which is a better definition of what their purpose in life is. Too many of our state institutions just want to be the basic liberal arts institutions. I do believe that they need to have a very good fit into the regional economies in which they operate, such as the University of Lowell does up in that area, emphasizing engineering and other aspects that will help people gain employment. The University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, which is located in southeastern Mass, I think should again become more intimately tied into the regional economy. So I think it's seeking a further definition of what each institution's particular mission is, but also keeping them financially accessible, which they are not now.
Hi.
Yes?
My name is Karen Scotland. I work in the human service industry. I've been in there for 15 years, specifically the retarded. Since the Weld administration has come in, I've seen services severely cut for the retarded, and I've seen privatization have a big impact on services, and I wanted your opinion on this.
Well, you're right. My friend Senator Mark Pacheco, who is here, has led the fight on dealing with privatization and its often negative effects. Look, the sad part is we've always had privatization of some services in Massachusetts. It had never been abused before. I serve on the board of an organization called the Robert F. Kennedy Action Corps that delivers care to juveniles in a private way, contracted out by state government. The difficulty is that the Weld administration has abused it. I visited a hospital in western Massachusetts, Alzheimer's patients and coma victims, that they slated to close. They claimed that they had done a study showing that there were private placements available for these patients that were perfectly satisfactory. In fact, they lied. They had done no such study. The families of the patients had to get together themselves and research the matter and find that indeed, in many of the cases, there were not alternative private settings. The governor had to come back out to the hospital, relinquish his initial closing order, and keep it open. Oftentimes, they're closing institutions for ideological reasons. They want to be able to give the press a list of institutions they've closed to try to show how tough they are. There are many cases in which mentally retarded citizens could do well in community care. There are many of those cases in which they cannot, in which they need a safe and secure setting that only a state institution can provide. We will maintain those when they're necessary and move to community care when it is feasible and also kind.
Thank you.
Guys, can I just ask you all, I know there are a lot of people lined up for questions, but I also sense that some people have reached their limit. Should we do like 2 or 3 more questions? Okay. No? You want us to do none more? Okay. We'll do we'll do 4 more questions. Yes.
What are you going to do with the kids in the inner city to keep them out of the welfare system, out of the welfare motherhood business, and out of crime? What are you going to do with the inner city, grade school, all of them, grade school, high school, whatever? What are you going to do to get them, to keep them out of trouble?
That's kind of a big question. I'll try to take my best whack at it.
Okay.
We have, I'll sort of go at a side route. Right now we have a glitch, a demographic glitch that is causing crime statistics to drop in this country. We have very few, well, not very few, but we have an unusually small number of males between the ages of 16 and 25. Now, that is, by the way, why crime statistics have gone slightly down. Because, in fact, a higher percentage of males between the ages of 16 and 25 are committing crimes than ever before, which means in the next decade, as we go into an exactly opposite demographic curve, we're going to have a crime explosion in America if we don't do something about it. Because if the same percentage of these folks commit crimes, we will have a literal doubling of some violent crime statistics. We have to bring opportunity back to these kids. We have to turn the spigot off at the source on crime. If we don't turn the spigot off at the source, you can put all the police on the street you want, you can build all the prisons you want, you can do all the tough on crime things that all the politicians talk about, and you're still going to have a serious crime problem. So most of the stuff they called fluff in the federal crime bill was the best stuff in the federal crime bill. Youth programs. I met with police officers the other day. The police officers are beginning to ask the politicians to stop the demagoguery and start doing something for kids, because they know that until kids, especially in our urban communities, have better schools and more hope, we're going to continue to see an increase in crime.
I just would like to tell a quick story to illustrate this. I went out a number of weeks ago to visit Sheriff Mike Flynn, who's the sheriff of Worcester County, and I went to the House of Corrections and I sat in his office. Sheriff Flynn has been sheriff for a long time, and he's a mammoth of a man, and he was behind a huge desk, and I'm sitting in front of his huge desk looking at this man and his desk and his window and his walls and his barbed wire and his watchtowers, and I said to him, Sheriff Flynn, what can we do about this problem? What can we do about crime and about young people? And he said, what we need to do about crime in Massachusetts is more daycare, more education, more health care. Now, that's what I've heard from police chiefs, district attorneys, sheriffs, and from the Attorney General of Massachusetts. The one person who is not saying this is the governor. And that's why we need a new governor.
I got to tell you guys something. The 20-80% rule applies on applause as well. Yes, sir.
I'm Jim Tipton from here in Cambridge. Like you, I'm a Democrat, but not, at least you didn't say so, I'm proud to call myself a liberal Democrat. My first vote...
Did you say liberal, sir?
I said liberal Democrat.
Liberal. Okay, just wanted to make sure I heard that.
My first vote was in 1932 for Franklin Roosevelt, a familiar name. I started to sit down when the young man who teaches in a prison spoke, but then I decided, you said something. When my man Barrett lost to you, shortly afterward, he wrote a letter to all of his supporters, I presume. I got a letter asking me to support Mark Roosevelt. He says he's a good man. I'm not yet convinced. Your answer, the issue, is one of the popular ones today, crime. Your answer didn't really satisfy me. Capital punishment is something that with the passion that you used when you spoke, justifiably, when a person is killed for having killed, that's vengeance. And as you said, it doesn't deter others from committing the crime. Now, you pressed Governor Weld last evening, and you agreed with him on this issue, apparently, for not being able to say what he would stand for that the public opposed. You didn't speak strongly enough. Would you say something more about all the evidence that I know on the murder and the capital punishment as a result? The states that have capital punishment today still have more murders per capita than a state like Massachusetts.
But it's not because they have capital punishment.
It's what?
It's not because they have capital punishment.
Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. My point is it doesn't reduce it.
Nor did I claim it did, sir.
I know you said that, but I'm asking you to speak some more about why you will not go against the public opinion on this issue, which you know something else is needed to keep people from murder. You've spoken a lot. I'm still to be convinced. I'm open-minded, I hope.
Well, I can't tell you. I think there's just something that we disagree on here. What I do say, and I've said it every single time this issue has come up, I support the death penalty for the reason that I think the statement of it is important. I do believe that. When I look at the murder of the trooper recently in Massachusetts, here's a man who was killed before. In fact, he had to be plea bargained down to manslaughter, but it was really a first-degree murder situation previously. He was plea bargained down to manslaughter for a kind of an amazing reason, which is that the woman who was the eyewitness fell in love with him and married him and couldn't testify in court because she was then his wife, which is one of the odder situations that I've confronted in my view of criminal justice. When he shot that trooper, he did so in cold blood. He did so of an officer. He has the shell from the trooper's gun in the back of his head, so guilt is not a question. In my opinion, I don't ask it to be your opinion. In my opinion, this is not a case of vengeance. It's a case of this person has lost their right to live with the rest of us. That's what I feel. I can recognize and respect your disagreement. I try not to overstate or demagogue the issue in order to say other things that the death penalty will do other than take the life of that person who I think has lost their right to live. That's just my personal opinion.
If I could simply add, with a young man, I taught in prison in Connecticut for a while. And one of my friends, one of the prisoners that I tutored became a friend, had committed murder. And that has helped me think about some people who've committed murder can be rehabilitated. And that's why. The other is, for the state to kill someone who's killed seems to me to be not setting the right example.
You know what I found on this issue? I have never known anybody to convince another person on this issue. I have discussed it at enormous length with a whole host of people. I mean, I can go back at you and say, yeah, but we send people out to fight a war who are totally innocent, and we draft them into it, and we as a state seem to think we have a right to take their lives when they die in battle. So there are a lot of things to say. But you know what? I'm not going to convince you.
You might.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I have been persuaded before, never again.
Two more questions. I'm sorry. I really am sorry. I'll answer your questions afterwards for the two behind, but we really do have to close up, and I don't want to be the...
Well, you have to listen to me, sir. I have just come in to talk to you, so you better...
We will talk to you right afterwards, I promise.
No way. I'm going to make it very short.
Okay. We're going to do 3 questions. As you can see, in the end, I'm a soft touch. Yes.
Mr. Roosevelt, my name is Carol Chodroff. I'm in school at the Graduate School of Education. And I'd like to thank you for your commitment and dedication to our nation's poorest citizens, our children. Given your support of childhood programs, Head Start, educational reform, I believe you're not just paying lip service to these children, but they can't wait for the legislation to be passed. They're hungry now. They're dropping their fellow children out of windows now. Children are dying now. What would you suggest that we do? Because although I'm a Democrat and believe deeply in government, we all need to be in this together. What would you suggest to your public? What policies and programs and services can we enact to help out?
Well, we've tried. I mean, the 2 bills I'm proudest of are the Childhood Hunger Relief Act, which made WIC, which is the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, an entitlement in Massachusetts. We don't usually say the word entitlement. In this case, it should be. It means that every eligible woman will get it. Before, we've been turning people away who were eligible. And the Education Reform Bill is funneling $1.2 billion more to schools. These aren't just things that I talked about. They're done. They're on the books. The money is going out. The problems are not solved. By no means are they solved. Education reform and addressing these issues is an ongoing process. There's no one bill that's going to have a solution. But all that we can all do is just keep fighting. And obviously, you've chosen to do that with your life, and that's all we can do, is keep going. And, you know, again, it reminds me of just going to Everett. And we just all have to remember the pleasure and the meaning you get when you look at the kids that are doing better, and remember that there are lots of kids that aren't yet at that point. Yes, sir.
Hi. I have a question about human rights. In 1776, it seems the rights were more like freedom of speech, religion, that sort of thing, very vague things that if you can do it, you know, the right to bear arms. If you can afford it, fine, but not that we'll give you arms. It seems that today, we all feel that people have more rights that if you can't afford food, you're going to get it anyway, shelter, clothing, education, healthcare. Where does that end? Where does a luxury, what before was a luxury, where does it become a right? At what point do you say, this is something that you need to be able to afford and not something that is a basic human right? For instance, healthcare, you know, cutting edge technology, is that a right?
I just have this gut instinct that this is a question that a minister should answer.
Isn't he great? I would answer that question, first of all, by pointing to the distribution of resources and justice in a society that is clearly affluent. In the United States, we have a great deal. And the problem is not we don't have enough to go around. The problem is we have a lot, but it isn't going around. Given that, my way of looking at this question is to say that one of the roles of government is to make sure that people have access to certain basic building blocks that they need to build a good life. And I would say 4: housing, education, health care, and a job. Now, if you don't have those 4 things, if you have housing and education, but you don't have health care and a job, you're not going anywhere. If you lose any one of those, you cannot, no matter what your effort, no matter what your intentions, you cannot build a good life for yourself and for your family. And we're not talking about handing all those things to people so that they can have them without effort. We're talking about making sure that people have access to housing, education, health care, and a job. And the problem is, in my community of Somerville, not far from here, and in the communities that I've seen all across Massachusetts, there are many hundreds of thousands of people who do not have access to housing, education, healthcare, and a job. And I think that's one of my basic reasons for stepping forward, is that if we are serious about wanting to see people live a decent life, build a life for themselves, contribute to society, raise a family if they choose, then we must play a role in making sure they gain access. That is why we need an active government that cares about justice.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. What's the difference between giving them access and paying for it?
Yeah,
Well-
I should understand.
Well, let's take healthcare. The system that we have of healthcare right now, of private health insurance, market-driven health insurance, takes a group of people like this and goes around and says, we'll cover you and you and you, but not you, because you need healthcare. You and you and you, but not you, because you have a predisposition to some illness. I've experienced that personally as someone who grew up with a chronic illness. So the point there is not, I mean, at one point, this is actually true, the Weld administration thought that the way to solve the healthcare crisis was to pass a law requiring everybody to get health insurance. They said people have auto insurance, we'll pass a law to, they need auto insurance to drive a car, we'll pass a law saying they have to have health insurance in order to, I don't know, live. That implied that people were too stupid or too miserly to go out and buy health insurance. The problem was not that. It is that we had a system that provides the best care at the lowest cost to the people who least need it, and systematically identified people who needed medical care and threw them off the back of the bus. Now that is a question of access, and that is a question of justice. Why Bill Weld has spent 4 years and still can't see that, I don't know, but Mark and I can. Thank you.
I would have answered the question similarly, but slightly different, but it's getting late. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. My name is Caroline Osterman. As you can see, I am a Spanish woman, and I am a professional person. I want just to congratulate you for yesterday night. Was very good, that debate, and that is the reason that I am here. My question will be for your running mate. I want to know...
This is the last question, that's to him?
Yes, to him, to him.
This is devastating.
I'm sorry, but he is going to answer.
I may have to make a concluding comment.
I would like to know, what do you intend to do in order to change or to make a difference in ethics in government? As you notice, ethics and values not count any longer in Massachusetts. And I am there, and I am seeing it every day, and you will be shocked and surprised the things that I can see and I can hear. And not only that, the fact is that Mr. Weld and all the people who work with him are completely out of touch with with we people who have put him there. A big mistake. So you can answer, and thank you again.
Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is believe that what's happening is wrong. I mean, I'll tell you something. As somebody brand new to politics, I got into politics, and of course I was told we have to go talk to these learned insiders and consultants and professionals and so forth. And over again, they would say, you can't do this, Bob, because it can never happen. Or they'd say, this is just the way politics is, Bob, you better get used to it. And fortunately for me, I was new enough that I could still get angry. Retaining some kind of grip on our anger about stuff that is wrong is really important. And growing up, I always thought I had an excess of passion about these kinds of things. But I find in politics there's not enough, so maybe a little excess is a good idea. But let me give you a couple of examples. We have a governor who, because he has no policy and no principles, went around to mayor after mayor after mayor throughout Massachusetts in order to silence them and prevent them from supporting Mark and from supporting me, simply handed out dough. Now, that's what incumbents do, I'm told. I don't care. It's still wrong. And I've seen a governor who has hired people who are now also have contracts with casino interests and others. I've seen his chief fundraiser, be the lobbyist for companies with the largest contracts with the state. I mean, we've seen basically a message gone forth from the governor that as long as it's not strictly illegal and nobody's indicted, it's okay. That's not right. The governor has duties for moral leadership and ethical leadership that exceed that. Now, I think just for starters, it's important to say that and important to stick to that. And one of the saddest things, and Mark pointed it out so beautifully last night, was to get up and when he got up and spoke to Bill Weld and said, what has happened to you? What kind of person have you become over 4 years, coming in as a U.S. attorney, defending ethics, and then feeding at the same slop table as the past? So, number one, we have a deep commitment to change that. And I think probably the most important thing to change and improve ethics in government is to curb the effect of big money. And that means money in elections, and that means money in politics and lobbying. And I know that Mark and I are equally committed to making sure, when we get in, that we open up the democratic process, that we reduce the effect of money, that we hold to the highest possible standards. Mark and I just released an ethics statement of what we will do. And what I expect is that if we don't do it, you will come back and hold us accountable. That's what democracy should be. That's what we expect will happen on November 8th, because Bill Weld failed in his promise, which he made 4 years ago, to bring ethics back to government.
Thank you all very much for having us. And for those of you, let me just ask a question. How many of you want to run for office? Jessica. How many of you want a career in public service? Great. Well, look, I've really enjoyed this. I'm sure that Bob has as well. Keep the faith. Stay involved. The whole point is you can make a difference. And I thank you for sharing this evening with us very much.
And I think we have thanks to both of the candidates for joining us for 2 hours, and to all of you for all that you contributed. It's a school night. Good night.
Oh, okay. Thank you.